Being an architect by profession, I was thrust into the unique position of being a bride on what was meant to be the most painstakingly planned day of my life. Everything about the wedding had been meticulously planned, right down to the flower arrangements and evening music selection. I had pictured the day as if it were a scene from a love story, where everything is overcome by love. My fiancé Tyler, an engineer who is well known for his direct and rational approach, and who is the ideal match for my creative side, nervously smiled as he waited at the altar. But as I made my way down the aisle, I saw that Tyler had a far-off expression in his eyes, almost like he was carrying a weight. I attempted to brush it off as just wedding jitters, but my anxiety only increased when I saw Tyler's mother, Betty, glancing at a neighbor while whispering in a whisper. She faked a smile and murmured, "You look beautiful," but her fake smile was evident in her eyes. Tyler paused tensely before saying, "I do," as the ceremony went on and the minister inquired if he took me as his lawful married wife. But there was no warmth in his eyes that I had always connected with those words. Betty got up during the ring exchange and proclaimed loudly that she had to record this moment, but her declaration sounded more like a warning than a celebration. When I arrived at the reception, Betty made a mocking comment about my unusual attire, implying that I was breaking some sort of rule. In an effort to keep things lighthearted, I responded that I didn't see any reason to precisely follow tradition because I considered weddings to be celebrations of love. Tyler's attempt to defuse the situation was consoling, but it came across as resigned, which was inappropriate for such a joyous moment. Tyler and I danced together robotically as we started our first dance, our bodies near, but our spirits far apart. It seemed odd, the song that was supposed to be our love anthem. The distance felt wide and uneasy when Tyler asked if I was ready for forever. I said in the affirmative, against all odds believing that the ominous cloud hanging over us would soon part. I was unaware, though, that this was just the beginning of a string of difficulties that would put our marriage to the test and make me face my true self. Even as we all raised a glass to our new beginning, there was still a persistent feeling that something had already ended. Returning to our comfortable 4-bedroom house, which was supposed to be our haven after the wedding, felt more like entering an unknown future. But the walls I had thought would protect our happiness started to feel like prison bars, which created the foundation for continuous conflict inside the family. My mother-in-law, Betty's quiet infiltration began with her numerous unannounced visits and constant criticism. This resulted in a stunning announcement that she would be moving in with us permanently and occupying the comfortable reading nook I loved so much. I looked helplessly at Tyler, thinking he would defend our personal space, and my heart fell. With trembling emotion in my voice, I took Tyler aside. "Tyler, this is our house. Isn't it better that we discussed this before coming to this conclusion?" He looked back at me, but it seemed as though the warmth and affection that had been in his eyes only months earlier had disappeared. "Betty, Mom is growing older." His emphasis on family made me feel left out as he reasoned that she shouldn't be alone and should instead be with her family. "So I'm not?" I questioned, my eyes welling with tears and hurting. "You understand that's not my intention," he answered in an irritated tone, "but my mother has given me so much. I owe this to her." "What about what we owe each other?" I retaliated. "Tyler, we recently got married. We should be using this time to develop as a team, not to please your mother." But my requests appeared to be ignored. It was a unilateral decision that rendered my thoughts, feelings, and sense of place meaningless. After Betty moved in, their relationship, which had once been based on love, became a hotbed of resentment and egos. Her imposing presence made every room feel claustrophobic. The intimate times I used to spend with Tyler, as well as the serene spots where I used to read, were now gone. I discovered that I was fighting for my own identity, dignity, and peace of mind, in addition to trying to keep my marriage intact and get back my house. I couldn't help but wonder, how did this happen? How did my decisions and life end up being subordinated to the whims of others? My once peaceful reading nook was overrun by Betty's possessions. Her criticisms took center stage in the kitchen, and my husband, the man I had assumed I would spend my life with, became a stranger who supported the opposition, and that was just the start. Life was difficult before, but nothing compared to the nightmare that followed. The atmosphere at home became more and more oppressive, like I could feel the walls closing in around me. The sight of 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test in my shaking hands should have been a happy moment, a treasured occasion, but instead, it was just another example of the mounting strain. However, given these circumstances, the overwhelming reality of our household life seemed to eclipse the news of my first pregnancy. With reddened eyes from restraining tears, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and realized that the pregnancy milestone had turned into a heavy weight. Tyler responded with a disappointingly apathetic response when I told him the news. "Well, that's something," he said, swiftly changing the subject to his mother's suggested home renovation. But Betty welcomed my pregnancy as though it were a heavenly calling. She began dictating everything, including what I should eat and do every day. Her intervention didn't stop at advice when I was supposed to give delivery in the hospital. She used my pregnancy as yet another arena in which to flex her psychological power. "You're eating again?" she would ask, glancing at the little sandwich I had made. "Shouldn't you be careful about gaining weight during pregnancy?" Trying not to lose my cool, I shot back, "This is doctor-recommended, Betty." She sneered. "These days, doctors are ignorant. We knew how to handle pregnancies back when I was a child." My vitality began to fade as the weeks went by, but Betty's demands increased. She made my house into her kingdom, treating me like a servant rather than an expectant daughter-in-law, ordering me to cook, clean, and attend to her every need. She would yell from her self-appointed throne in my former reading nook, which was now her hideout for daytime TV viewing and incessant phone scrolling. "Betty, why haven't you vacuumed the living room yet?" "Betty, I've been feeling quite exhausted today. The physician recommended me to rest," I said, my voice brimming with fatigue. "Tiredness during pregnancy isn't an illness, you know," she retorted. Tyler remained silent throughout it all, his acquiescence to the situation creating further stress. Betty's criticism of my baby name choices during a heated dinner brought the whole thing to a breaking point. A child with that name would be absurd. She scoffed. "You might as well put a kick me sign on his back for the rest of his school career." I retaliated angrily, saying, "Enough is enough, Betty. I get to decide how to raise this child since it's mine." Her voice became more intense, and her eyes lit up with rage. At last, Tyler stepped in, but not in my favor. "Betty, you seem very sentimental." Looking from Tyler to Betty, and then around the house that had become my jail, he continued, "Mom's just giving her opinion." I felt completely alone, degraded, and imprisoned. I could hardly recognize the reflection in my tarnished wedding ring. It was a lady who was slowly losing everything that had once made her unique. I had previously loved my house, my honor, and my will to keep going. Nevertheless, the pressure of ongoing combat steadily undermined such ideals. During one such family meeting, Betty looked me in the eyes and said, "Maybe you shouldn't be a part of this family if you can't handle a simple family discussion." Her tone was triumphant and chilly. At that moment, Tyler's silence was unbearable, cutting through me more deeply than any uttered words could have ever imagined. I was instantly aware that my nightmare was not only coming, it had already engulfed me, transforming my life into a confusing maze of suppressed tears and broken dreams. I wandered through the house like a ghost, where each room echoed the absence of the warmth it once held. The baby growing inside me became my sole beacon of hope, the last shred of joy in a life that felt increasingly hollow. Yet even this small solace was under threat. The breaking point arrived on a frigid evening during one of those dreadful family dinners, which were always thick with tension. I had labored for hours over a meal, anticipating Betty's inevitable criticism. Each of her critiques struck like a sharp jab. Every scoff felt like a slap. I braced myself for her usual disparagement, but this time her words cut deeper than ever. "You think you're fit to be a mother if you can't even manage a household? What are you going to do with a baby?" Betty sneered, each word a piercing attack on my already fragile self-esteem. My hands shook, and tears blurred my vision, but before I could respond, Tyler chimed in, solidifying my despair. "Mom has a point, Betty. You need to step it up. We're going to be parents soon." That was the last straw. A surge of anger mixed with years of accumulated resentment and humiliation coursed through me. "Step it up! Step it up!" I exclaimed, my voice filled with a fierce intensity that even I hadn't expected. "I am carrying our child, managing our house, and enduring relentless emotional abuse from your mother, and you tell me to step it up." Both Tyler and Betty looked taken aback by the force of my outburst. At that moment, the reality of my situation was stark and unyielding, laying bare the profound isolation and disrespect I faced daily within what was supposed to be the sanctuary of my own home. The tension inside me had built up like a dormant volcano, and finally it erupted. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore," I declared, my voice breaking under the strain. "I won't raise my child in a place where their mother is treated like nothing. If this is what family is to you, then I want no part of it." With those words, I left the dinner table, leaving Tyler and Betty in stunned silence. I quickly packed a small bag, my hands shaking so much that I struggled with the simple action of turning the door knob. It was then that Betty decided to strike what she thought would be her final blow. "Where do you think you're going? This is Tyler's house, not yours," she sneered. I turned to face her, meeting her gaze firmly. "Actually, Betty, this house is mine. I bought it, and I have every right to decide who stays and who leaves." "Betty, don't do this. Let's talk about it," Tyler implored, his voice desperate, finally grasping the gravity of the situation. "There's nothing left to talk about," I replied, tears streaming down my cheeks as I opened the door to the cold night outside. As I stepped out, I felt the finality of the moment. The door closing behind me seemed to signify the end of a prolonged tragic chapter in my life. I started walking. Each step away from that house was painful yet necessary. I didn't know where I was headed, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of agency over my fate. Despite the high emotional cost, the icy wind cut through my thin clothes as I wandered the deserted streets, the cold biting into my skin as sharply as the turmoil inside me. I walked, lost in a daze of emotional and physical exhaustion, until I nearly reached my parents' house, a haven I desperately needed. Just steps away from safety, my foot caught on an uneven slab of pavement, sending me tumbling to the ground. My ankle twisted in pain. The physical pain was sharp, but it paled in comparison to the emotional pain I was enduring. Limping and tearful, I finally made it to my parents' doorstep. Their shocked expressions upon opening the door mirrored the severity of my ordeal. This breakdown was a long overdue fracture in a life that had already endured too many pressures. As they hurried me to the hospital, I was painfully aware that changes were necessary. I couldn't return to that house, not to Tyler, and certainly not to a life overshadowed by Betty's oppressive presence. Reaching my breaking point wasn't just the end. It marked a new beginning, a harsh but essential step toward regaining the life that had been slowly stripped away from me. Hospital rooms, with their sterile walls and the constant beeping of machines, have a stark way of thrusting reality upon you. Lying there with my sprained ankle propped up and undergoing checks for any complications from the fall, I experienced a blend of relief and fear. My parents stood by, their faces a mix of concern and quiet anger about the ordeal I had endured. They had always sensed something was amiss in my marriage, but the full extent of its dysfunction was now glaringly obvious. "Sweetheart, what are you going to do now?" my mom asked, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was laden with concern. "I don't know, Mom," I responded. "But what I do know is that I can't go back. Not now. Not ever." My voice was surprisingly steady. My dad, who had been pacing back and forth, stopped and faced me. "Your mother and I will support whatever decision you make, but you need to think about your future and the future of your child," he advised. I nodded, my mind already a labyrinth of potential scenarios, each filled with uncertainty, but also flecked with the promise of newfound freedom. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Betty, where are you? We need to talk." Without hesitation, I turned off my phone. Whatever Tyler had to say, it was too little, too late. I was done with discussions. It was time for actions that spoke louder than any words could. My first act was a decisive one. I called a family lawyer. With my parents beside me, we discussed divorce proceedings, child custody, and alimony. There was a chillingly clinical aspect to dissecting a failed relationship in legal terms, but it also filled me with a sense of empowerment. For the first time, I was taking control of my life, making decisions that prioritized my well-being and that of my unborn child. A week later, Tyler and Betty were served with divorce papers. This step wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my independence and laying the groundwork for a future where I could breathe freely, unencumbered by the shadows of a toxic relationship. Along with the divorce papers, my lawyer filed a notice of eviction against Tyler and Betty from the house that was legally mine. Additionally, the paperwork included demands for substantial child support payments and compensation for the emotional turmoil I had endured. These measures were severe, yet essential, a firm severance of the toxic ties that had bound me for too long. When I eventually turned my phone back on, it was flooded with messages and missed calls from Tyler. "Betty, please can we talk about this?" I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. One message read, followed by another. "I'm sorry, Betty. I never wanted any of this to happen. Let's find a way to make it right." For a moment, I was tempted to respond to hear him out, but then memories of the countless nights filled with humiliation, years of emotional neglect, and Betty's relentless cruelty, all tacitly condoned by him, resurfaced. Any lingering affection was now buried beneath the debris of our shattered marriage. Resolutely, I deleted the messages, erased his number, and blocked him on all social media platforms. Tyler was now just another part of my history, a traumatic story I was ready to put to rest. I knew that the journey ahead would not be without difficulties. Divorce cases are naturally complicated, especially if children are involved. But I felt like I was in charge of my future for the first time in a very long time. Although it was a difficult voyage, it guided me away from the devouring darkness and into an uncertain but promising better future. The courtroom had that certain cold, impersonal feel to it that characterizes spaces where fortunes and lives are made or broken in an instant. Sitting next to me was my lawyer, who looked confident and had a pile of documents ready. My parents' moral support was evident behind me. Tyler was sitting across the room, looking defeated and bewildered, while Betty was sitting next to him, her countenance a mask of indignant disbelief. The BFF said, "All rise," and Judge Anthony walked in. The dissolution of the marriage happened in a blur. Evidence of Tyler's neglect and Betty's abusive behavior was given to the court, exposing lies and laying bare a flurry of facts and accusations. I watched as their faces twisted, maybe realizing for the first time that they were being observed by the authorities. The seriousness of the matter enveloped the courtroom as the judge spoke to Betty. "Ms., you are being accused of harassment and emotional abuse. The amount of evidence used against you is substantial. How would you implore?" Betty stumbled, not the confident person she usually was. There was a hint of desperation in her response. "This has all been taken out of context, Your Honor. I was just concerned about my son's welfare." The judge swiftly responded, "It seems your definition of well-being is quite twisted," showing that he was not impressed. Following a succinct but thorough assessment, Judge Anthony rendered the decision. Betty and Tyler are officially divorced by the court. The only person who will be granted custody of the unborn kid is Betty. "Tyler, you must make the state-mandated child support payments. Mrs. Betty, you are subject to a $300,000 fine due to the substantial proof of your emotional abuse and harassment." As the gavel fell, I felt a sense of relief, but it was a bittersweet victory. Rather than ending in fiery arguments, my marriage had ended with a peaceful exchange of divorce decrees. It was more expensive than I could have ever imagined, but I was free. Tyler came up to me on my wedding day as we were leaving the courtroom. His look was one of remorse mixed with perplexity. "I'm very sorry, Betty. I never imagined we would end up here," he said in a somber tone. When I looked at him, the man I thought I would live a lifetime with, all I felt was emptiness where love used to be. "Tyler, I didn't believe so either, yet here we are." I said, "It's too late to apologize now," as I turned to face him and started to go away. As I walked by, Betty tried to look up at me, maybe looking for approval or maybe forgiveness, but I gave her none. She'd taken too much out of me. I could not give her the gratification of knowing that I was still affected by her. The world appeared lighter and more colorful as soon as I left the courthouse, as though I was viewing everything through a different prism. It felt like a new chapter, one that I would write on my terms, free from the continual shroud of dread and emotional upheaval. With tears in her eyes, my mother gave me a strong embrace. "Betty, you succeeded. You're at liberty." I gave her a big, heartfelt embrace in return. "I couldn't have gone through this without you and Dad." With each other, we stepped into the fresh light of a new day, prepared to go forward and let go of the past. My dad joined in the group hug and stated, "We'll always be here for you," in a steady, comforting voice, "and for your new beginning." That night, As I sat by myself in the silence of my home, which was now unquestionably mine, I experienced a deep sense of calm. I was alone, yet I didn't feel lonely. I had to live up to my own expectations for the first time in a long time. I was still a little nervous about the difficulties that were ahead since, well, I was going to become a single mother, which is a really demanding duty. However, as I put my palm on my abdomen and felt the soft movements of my unborn child, I had a peaceful, certain feeling descend upon me. This harrowing voyage had forced me to face some important truths. Even while the scars from the past were still there, they now told a story of survival rather than failure. I was prepared for whatever was ahead, not out of need, but rather a state of will. Making the decision to take control of my life and determine my own fate was crucial. It was the prospect of a fresh start, one filled with resiliency, optimism, and just discovered independence.